No problem.
How has your week been?
Oh, pretty good. Today's my 3-year-old's birthday, so his grandparents were at our house yesterday to celebrate because my wife works all day today. And so far, so good. Not much to complain about. With my kids going back to school, I'm starting to get time to work on things again. So,
Cool. Yeah, exciting. Three years old, huh?
yeah, my son's 3 and my daughter's 5. You
Kids
got any
scare
kids?
me. Nope.
You don't have any kids yourself?
Nope.
No.
Is the sound good? Question mark. Ask the
They
chat.
change the way you look at things because then things can't be all about you anymore. So.
All right. It looks like we're live. So, Phil, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Oh, sure. I could give you like a whole hour-long introduction as to how I got into philosophy, but that's probably not what people want to hear. My name's Phil Kallberg. I live in Bolivar, Missouri, with my wife and 2 kids. My wife's a doctor. I'm currently an adjunct professor of philosophy at Southwest Baptist University. I got a master's in philosophy. Before that, I got a bachelor's in English, and I was in the military right out of high school for about 5 years. And that's that's the short version. For a much longer version, go look at the podcast I run, and the first podcast is an hour long version. So,
Would you like to give a link so people can find you? Like, where can they find your podcast?
if you do a search for the Examined Life with Phil, it should show up on every podcast app there is. I'm not aware of anyone that it isn't on. If you go to WCAT Radio, WCAT Radio, you can find it in a web browser all on there. So
Cool. So,
I've got about. Oh, I didn't
go
mean to
ahead.
interrupt you. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
I've
That's
got
fine.
I've got about 94 or 95 episodes on various things relating to philosophy. Some of them are apologetic related because I am a Christian philosopher, but I'm more interested in doing philosophy proper than just apologetics. But since I'm a Christian who is a philosopher, naturally there's a little bleed over there. I haven't been updating it as much as I should during the last year because other things have been taking my focus away from it. So,
Cool. So I am an atheist, by which I mean I believe that naturalism better explains absolutely everything. Every single argument, piece of evidence can better explain by naturalism. Would you mind telling me some of the reasons you believe in a God or that work or indicate the existence of God? And I could tell you my thoughts on those reasons and hear your thoughts on my position.
well, how much time do you have?
I have about a spare 37 years, something like that.
um, well, I'm of the opinion that most of the how can I put this? There's very good philosophical reasons to think that there's God or something very much like him. That naturalism doesn't best explain everything that we see, as you say. And there, I would make a distinction that there's some people who call themselves atheists who still believe in like immaterial things. Like I know there are atheists who would say, "Well, I don't believe in God, but I think your mind is immaterial." And I'd have a much harder time quibbling with them because I think the existence of immaterial things is one of the things that points us to naturalism is not a good explanation. Like, uh, I think the minds are just obviously immaterial. And like, for example, you have a mind. I'm pretty sure you do anyway, and I know I do. And there's aspects of my mind that are immaterial. Like my thoughts are things that can't be physically located. They can't be divided like physically located things do. They don't have the properties that material things do. And so I would say that's something that's not very well easily explained by naturalism. Because if you're going to claim something like emergentism, that the mind emerges from a significantly complex state of affairs, like your brain states or something like that, then I think you're left with a problem because you're claiming that something came about that is the exact opposite of what it came about. That is, you got the immaterial from the material, and those two are necessarily in the opposite of each other. So that's one of the things I would point to say, if you're just talking about naturalism, I don't think naturalism is a good explanation of everything we see. Now, it's a very good explanation of many things. Like if you're talking about the laws of physics, chemistry, how most of the physical sciences work, naturalism works very, very well for a great many of those things. But there are aspects that I see in reality, and from talking with other people, most everyone else claims that they have minds and they have feelings and they see and experience things that are similar to I am. And I think if I met somebody who claimed I don't have a mind, I'd probably be pretty suspicious they were lying to me for some reason. So
Sure, that's a
that's
great
what I
place
would
to.
start with. Yeah.
Sure, let's start with that one. So, mind is immaterial. Now, I don't see any reason to believe the mind is immaterial. Like, obviously, we don't know exactly what the mind is, but to conclude it's immaterial is like saying, "Oh, look, a UFO. It must be aliens." If it's an unidentified
No,
flying
not at
object,
all.
uh, well, let me finish first. So,
Okay.
if it's an unidentified flying object, to identify it as aliens would then be a contradiction in terms. So it seems like we haven't discovered exactly what the mind is, but there doesn't seem to be any reason to think it's some extra ontology we haven't discovered yet. It could always just be some new feature of natural physicalism that we just don't understand yet. Why conclude it's this entirely new thing rather than an unknown thing that's just an extension of what we already know?
Because it has properties that physical things don't. We can look at physical things and analyze them, and then we are all immediately aware of our own thoughts of our own minds, and it has properties that they don't, and vice versa. Like another example, when you have thoughts, your thoughts are about something. Like I'm sure 20 or 30 minutes ago, you were having the thought, oh, I'm going to have this conversation with Phil in a little bit here. And if you were like me, you were going and getting a glass of water or something to prepare for it. You had thoughts that were about something. Physical states are not about things. Like a rock is not about anything, it's just a rock. The property of intentionality is something that our minds and thoughts have, and physical things don't have that. And so that's where I would say, well, you've got evidence that there's more to the reality than just the material, than just the natural there, because we have a property that physical things don't have.
Well, so there's two things there. One is that even if we grant aboutness is a real thing, which I don't think it is, I think it's just a linguistic term we use, that could still be better explained by unknown physical stuff rather than new ontology. So even if we say none of the physical stuff has aboutness, and there is aboutness in this thing, it would still be more reasonable to say that aboutness is just an extension of the physical rather than to say it's an entirely new ontology which we have no evidence for to begin with.
Well, then you've turned it into a no-seum. You're positing something that you don't have direct evidence for to explain other things. And in and of itself, there's not necessarily anything wrong with that until a couple of years ago when they finally took a picture of one. Black holes were a no-seum, but they were posited because they were a good theory to explain things that were positive, other evidence that we saw, excuse me. But that only works if you've got other strong reasons to say, well, I can't let go of naturalism in this regard. Like if I can't think of an example right now, but if you had like an extremely strong argument for naturalism and then I posited, well, aboutness, then you'd be like, well, okay, the reasonable thing would be to say, okay, maybe that's evidence against my view, but it's not strong enough to overturn it, so I'm going to posit this no-seum. And that can be a derogatory term, but I don't necessarily mean it that way here. And say, well, there's probably a no-seum that explains it. Are you
Right.
following me there? Does
Yeah,
that make
I would
sense?
totally agree with that. I think that's induction. So, like, if we see a footprint in the snow, we have no idea what caused it. We only know of bears and squirrels, and it doesn't look like a bear or a squirrel. We could say maybe it's a mythical supernatural being like a unicorn, or we could say, it's probably one of the other natural animals. And so we would go with induction. The better answer is probably a natural animal we just don't know about yet, rather than an entire thing that has no basis in reality, no evidence whatsoever, a supernatural animal. So I would agree with you, but I would say that your position that the mind is immaterial is equally as unsupported because it's also a no-seum. We've never seen any immaterial things at all. There's no
Oh,
evidence of.
no, I don't buy that at all. You're perfectly aware of your mind. I'm perfectly aware of my
Well, that's
mind.
begging the question. We're asking.
It's the most immediately thing
That's
that's most immediately aware to all of us
that's
is our
begging the
own
question.
thoughts and our own experiences.
So we're
That's not
asking.
begging the question. You're not aware of your own mind? Come on, man.
We're asking the question: is the mind immaterial? So if you're saying the mind is immaterial because you experience it, that would be begging the question. So we have to.
No. I'm not saying that at all. No. I'm saying you're immediately aware of your own mind, and then we build from there. I'm not saying
Right.
you're immediately aware of your own mind, therefore it's immaterial. I'm saying you're aware of your own mind. I'm aware of my own mind. We can talk to each other about what it's like to have thoughts, to have the phenomena of the experiences of things we see and our minds process it. And most of the time when we talk to people, those experiences line up where people say, this is what it's like to think about things.
Okay, so the question here is the mind material or immaterial? So we agree the mind is there. We both agree we have minds. We're aware of our minds.
Mm-hmm.
Now we want to know, is it material or is it immaterial? So the mind is the unknown, and we want to say, what's the better explanation? I would say the better explanation is the one that has a massive body of evidence of existing stuff. Now, we could always add some new thing, like, well, maybe the mind is made of magical leprechauns, or maybe the mind is made of a genie farts or something, but both of those are unsupported because neither of those have any basis of evidence whatsoever. But if I say maybe it's an unknown natural thing, that has a significantly better inductive basis because at least it's a combination of things that we know exist rather than a combination of things that we don't have any reason to believe exist. And it seems to me the mind is immaterial is more in that leprechauns, genies category. And so the material answer would still be better in the exact same way because we have a past basis that material stuff exists on its own.
Except that by doing that, you can only do that by denying the properties that minds and thoughts seem to have that material things don't have. Like, for example, we have thoughts. Thoughts don't have a physical location. I can't dig into your brain and find a thought. Thoughts can't be divided like material can be. Let me give you some other ones.
Well,
Besides the aboutness.
Stick with those two.
You said that there isn't evidence. I'm going to give you some.
Well, that's not evidence. That's because those are just saying, here's things that we don't know about in the physical. So we know
that thoughts have those properties.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Philosophy of mind.
That's not what I'm saying. So what I'm saying is here is something we don't know that the physical can explain. We also don't know that the non-physical or the immaterial can explain this. So these things are better explained by saying they're unknown physical or natural things than to posit an entirely new ontology. Even if we have no evidence of other physical things that can have these properties, because we have evidence physical stuff exists and we have no evidence immaterial stuff exists, it's still better to say that the physical stuff can have an unknown feature to it about aboutness and intentionality and no physical location in the brain. Those are still better explained by unknown physical than by positing a new ontology.
Sorry, my wife just got home. I didn't mean to
no problem.
Be rude to you there. No, I don't quite follow what you're getting at there, because on top of that, like I already said, the immaterial is necessarily the opposite of the material. The two are as contradictory as two things can be. To assert that the immaterial arises from the material is a bit like saying, oh, we have a square circle or a married bachelor.
Right, but the question is we have a phenomenon, mind, and we don't know, is it physical, is it material, or is it immaterial? We don't know. That's the question. And so I'm saying it's material. It's not immaterial. Nothing about it is immaterial. There are features of it that we don't know how it is explained physically, but it's better to say that those features are not immaterial features. They're just new kinds of material features that we don't understand yet, rather than saying they're immaterial features. So I'm not saying any immaterial features have been come about by material causes. I'm saying the material causes created a new material thing we don't understand yet, and there is no immaterial.
That doesn't, but see that you're just ignoring what I said then, that the mind and our thoughts have properties that are not found in material, and we only find them in the immaterial. And you can only assert that by saying these properties aren't there, and that's why I'm claiming that it's immaterial, because they have properties that material things don't have.
No, so I can say those properties are there, and I can say they're explained by unknown material stuff. So they're not in any of the known material stuff, but they can still be in the unknown material stuff. So just because none of the known material stuff can have this property does not mean no material stuff can have this property. You cannot say it's impossible for any material things to have this property of aboutness or to have this property of not in the brain or whatever. There could absolutely be physical things that have both of those properties. So you can't rule out all physical or material things just because we don't see them in any of the current physical material things. So it would, because it seems like you're saying, oh, it's impossible because we only have this small subset of physical stuff and none of the small subset has property X. Therefore, property X cannot be in any physical stuff ever, no matter what we ever discover ever in the history of the universe.
We don't have a small subset of physical stuff. That we see a lot of physical things all over the place, and a lot of it's very well documented as far as what we know about the Earth and the universe and things like that. And it seems to me that the methodology you're using, you would always be able to say that no matter what evidence or reasons I could give you. You could always say, oh, it's another no-seum.
Right, but that would be...
So,
so two points. 2 points there. One is that...
Then if that's a bad methodology, there should always be at least a theoretical way of disproving your methodology, your worldview, or your theory.
Right, you
and
can...
If you can always say, oh, there's a no-seum here to preserve my theory, then it's a bad theory. It's unfalsifiable.
Right. So if you actually present positive evidence of immaterial things, like novel testable predictions that demonstrate they exist, independently of just saying it can explain something we can't explain physically, because that seems to be the whole argument for immaterial stuff is that, oh, we can't explain this physically, therefore immaterial. It's just an argument from ignorance.
No, that's not what I said at all.
Wait. So if you could actually present novel testable predictions that could confirm the immaterial independent of arguments from ignorance, that would be great evidence. But until then, you can't use it as an explanation any more than leprechauns. And so like if I said, there's a gold brick, it appeared in front of my lawn, we have no idea how it appeared, I said leprechauns could do it. Now, leprechauns might be able to explain the gold brick, but until we actually have independent evidence that leprechauns exist, the gold brick isn't evidence of the leprechaun. The gold brick is just something we don't understand yet. So the mind is the same thing. The mind is something we don't understand yet. So it's not evidence of the immaterial, it's something we don't understand yet. And the better explanation is one that is a combination of things that we do understand, rather than positing another thing we don't understand to try to explain the one thing we don't understand.
Yeah, you're using a poor methodology there, because what you
Science?
posited is an unfalsifiable theory that you can always posit
No.
a noceum to explain things. And I don't quite follow why you want it to be like I forget the exact term you use, so I might misquote you here, my apologies, but it was something like an experiment to demonstrate these things, or a repeatable experiment. If I misquoted you again, I apologize, because there's all kinds of things that we know and prove that aren't demonstrated that way. I'm quite confident that you have a mind, but I can't prove it with any kind of repeatable experiment. And I think you should be quite confident that I have a mind too, but again, you can't prove that with any kind of repeatable experiment.
Actually, I can make say
really?
if a
Do
mind
tell.
has the property of acting in such a way that if I give you like a math equation, what is 1 + 1, you'll come back with 2. You'll say it. Or if I tell you a joke, you'll laugh. So I can make predictions that if I give you a certain set of inputs, you'll come with a certain set of outputs, which gives me good evidence that you have a mind. So I can, in fact, make novel testable predictions that you have a mind. Is it 100% conclusive? No, but it doesn't need to be. Knowledge does not require certainty. But the first thing you said was
your
that
standard, I can give those to you, because that's easy.
That's great for immaterial things. That would be
I
great.
predict that the thoughts in your head are not spatially located and are not divisible like spatially located things are. You tell me about your thoughts, and I'm to demonstrate that that's not the case, and therefore you've undone the theory.
Well, so that's not a prediction, that's a not diction. So a prediction is something we don't know yet that we're going to see. You're saying, here's something we won't see. That's not a prediction. So a prediction,
That's a prediction, yeah. It's just not a positive prediction. It's just a negative one.
No, because that's hypocritical based on your own standard of unfalsifiability, because it won't see until when. Like you just say, we won't see it ever, isn't a prediction. That you'd still be there and we just didn't see it. So you would need to make a positive assertion. Here is something we don't know yet that we will see if the immaterial is real. You can't just say that we won't see it if we do physical stuff. That's not evidence of the immaterial.
Okay, I didn't quite follow you there. Could you explain that again? Because I didn't follow what you were getting at.
Sure. So if I say the evidence that the footprint in the snow is a unicorn is that we will never discover a horse anywhere in this valley. So if we look all through the valley, we never discover a horse. Is that evidence of a unicorn? No. It's like if I said, if we have 10 axles and 9 of the axles are broken, is that evidence that the 10th axle works? No. Presenting negative evidence of one hypothesis isn't positive evidence of a different hypothesis.
Not in and of itself. It depends on those circumstances and the context and what you're trying to prove. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence unless the theory you're looking at is something that would where we'd be likely to see the evidence of it. Like an example that I think I've used with other people before is, say somebody's claiming this woman has a son, and then you go around and you can find no evidence that she has a son, and like a doctor examines her and says she's never been pregnant. Well, in that case, the absence of evidence is evidence of absence. So it depends on the context and what you're trying to prove.
All right, absolutely. Like saying there's no liquid in the cup. I can just show you the cup, and that would be evidence of absence. But that's not the argument here. So the argument here is you're saying there is this new ontology of immaterial stuff. And this immaterial stuff, this new thing that exists, evidence that this new thing exists is that we don't find it with the old stuff. That's not evidence of a new thing.
And it's not a new ontology. This has been the default way most people have thought about things for a long, long period of time.
Well, I'm not interested in...
started, people thought that things were immaterial. Well, but if you're going to make a claim, make it right. It's
No,
not a new ontology to make a claim that people have an immaterial aspect. That's the way
new
isn't
isn't about what people thought in the past. What people thought is irrelevant. the new is like, does it actually have a basis in reality? And the answer is no. So it would be a new thing if it actually
Why
had a
are you
basis in
calling it
reality.
new then? That doesn't
Because if there
that
was
doesn't
actually
make
present
sense.
evidence of it that existed in reality, then it would be new, because there is none. So right now it's imaginary. All of the evidence of it is just imaginary, like leprechauns. And if you presented evidence of it that it actually existed, it would be a new ontology, a new discovery of a new thing that exists in the world.
Well, I can give you tons more properties that the mind has that physical things
Well,
don't, and I
that's
don't
the
quite
same problem.
understand why you're saying that isn't evidence. Now, maybe you think it's weak evidence, but that's
Zero,
still evidence.
zero evidence. It's the same thing as before. If I say there are 10 axles, 9 axles are broken, no, it doesn't. It's not evidence that the 10th axle works.
That's not at all. That's a false analogy. That's not at all like
How?
what I'm talking about. We know what physical things are very, very well because we interact with them all the time. We know physical things always have these properties. When we think about our thoughts and minds, we see it does not have these properties. In fact, it has properties that are very different. Therefore, you've got good cause to think these things are not alike. It's basic philosophy where if two things have the same properties, they're identical. So right now, the properties that the US president has and Joe Biden has are identical because Joe Biden is the US president. If two things have different properties, then they're not the same. If two things even have potentially different properties, they're not the same. That's just basic level philosophy. And so when you find that thoughts in the mind have properties that physical things do not, and vice versa, that's very good cause to say they're not the same. Maybe they interact in some way, maybe they're similar in some way, maybe at times there's even some crossover, but they're not the same. Just the same as uh, I really can't even think of an analogy to get at this because the immaterial and material are so disconnected and separate.
Well, I understand your point. The problem is it doesn't actually address my argument here. So if we know, like, it's incorrect to say we know everything about physicalism. We don't. We know 1/1,000,000th of 1% of anything, to quote Thomas Edison. Like, yeah, we don't know anything about the universe as a whole. So we know nothing essentially about the totality of physical things. So it'd be inherently fallacious to say we know everything about physicalism, so this property can't be explained by some unknown physical thing. Clearly not the case.
I never said that we know everything. We certainly don't.
Wait. I know. But the point here is that we know 0% about the immaterial. So we know a decent amount about the material, physical stuff. We know nothing about the immaterial stuff. And so here's some property that we don't know what it is yet, aboutness, as an example. You can't say, we've never discovered aboutness in the physical, therefore it must be this new thing we know literally nothing about. That would be a fallacy.
No, it wouldn't. That's if you make that inductively, that's not fallacious at all to say every time I've observed this, it's been here. Every time I've observed, every time I've observed X, it's been with Y. Every time I've observed A, it's been with B. Therefore, I infer that's the way it's going to be every other time I look. And if you've talked to other people and they relate the same experience, it's a very strong inference.
It's called the black swan fallacy.
I'm quite aware of that. And David Hume, if you're referring to David Hume's problem of induction, David Hume is not a good source to go to.
Well, I don't really care about Hume. This is just in every philosophy textbook ever. If you're saying, like, it's reasonable to say that there would be some unknown thing, like if there was evidence that some part of it existed independently. So like if we said in the forest there are horses and squirrels or whatever, and there's a footprint and we don't, but it's too small for a horse, we can infer it's a squirrel. We could never infer it's a unicorn. That's no footprint we see is ever going to be evidence of unicorn. The same thing applies here to the immaterial. It's like, no matter what you say about, here's all the known facts about the physical, here is some unknown facts that doesn't mix into any of those, it's still always going to be better to say it's an unknown physical.
Unknown facts, though. You're misconstruing this, and I don't know if you're misunderstanding or what.
So it's like about
you're more aware of your thoughts than you are of physical things because you receive your input of physical things mostly through your eyes, and your brain processes that, and you have thoughts about them. You're more immediately aware of your thoughts than you are physical things. All of us are. It's the nature of being embodied human beings.
So no, I'm talking about aboutness here. Is aboutness material or immaterial? This is an unknown fact. We don't know this. It's just a hypothesis one way or the other. So it's like if we see all of physics, everything we know about physics, and there's this new thing in physics, we have no idea what it is. It doesn't look like any of the physics. It's probably still unknown physics, like dark energy or dark matter or space-time bending. There's lots of examples of this, new discoveries of things that look totally different than what we already knew about. It's always better to conclude unknown physics than supernatural. The same thing here would apply to aboutness or not being in time. those things are more reasonable to say this is an unknown physical thing than to say it's an entirely new category that there's no evidence for. I'm not sure what you don't understand about like the analogy.
Well, I don't.
here.
You're. The reason I reject what you're saying is that it's unfalsifiable, because every time I bring up anything, you're just going to be able to say, oh,
Well,
it's
it
another
is.
no-seum. And that makes it a poor theory. Now, naturalism in and of itself is not necessarily a bad theory. It actually explains quite a bit. The way you're positing it's a poor theory because there's no way to falsify it.
Well, there is. It is falsifiable. Like
How?
So all I've done right now is present a counter argument to show that your argument is fallacious. There's obviously ways to falsify it. Like I could say, if the immaterial is real, then I would predict I can use the force to lift my TIV up. That will falsify my hypothesis. So I mean, I can pick infinitely many ways to falsify.
No, that's absurd though. That's not going to falsify anything. It has to be something that could actually, at least in theory, be falsifiable. Like, for example, I'm positing minds are immaterial. A way you could at least theoretically falsify that would be somebody builds an actual AI and there's an actual mind that arises from that. Now, because of me claiming minds are immaterial, I'm going to say that's probably impossible that that could actually be done. But if somebody did that and we could verify that it was a real mind, that because I love the Terminator movies, Skynet really did exist and it was an actual mind, that would falsify what I'm claiming, or at least potentially so. I don't see how we could ever falsify the naturalism as you're positing it, because you can always just say it's another no-seum. Like this, I've given you examples of how thoughts that have properties that the physical does not, and you're just rejecting that, saying that's not evidence, even though basic philosophy is if two things don't have the same properties, they must not be alike.
Right, because that's provably fallacious. So that has nothing to do with naturalism. It has nothing to do with my hypothesis. This isn't a hypothesis. This is just showing that your argument is inherently fallacious. Now I can present a hypothesis and say naturalism is true, therefore I can make like things that if naturalism was not true, here's this supernatural thing that I think would exist, and it would have this consequence that we would see, and if we don't see it, I can make a hypothesis falsifiable. But this isn't a hypothesis. I'm not presenting a hypothesis. I'm showing your argument is inherently fallacious.
How?
So,
what fallacy have I committed?
As I've said before, the black swan fallacy, also appealing to ignorance, argument from incredulity.
No, the problem with the black swan fallacy is you're positing something for which you have no evidence. Now, the fact that you're rejecting the evidence I've given you doesn't mean I don't have evidence. It just means you don't accept that.
Right. It's an argument from ignorance because it's not evidence. You're just saying, here is something we can't explain, therefore it's immaterial.
No, I've given you evidence. You're just rejecting it and claiming it's not evidence. I'm making the claim that when two things have different properties, that's evidence that they're not the same. Thoughts have properties that the physical does not, and vice versa. We have evidence that they're not the same. Now, you can sit there and reject that, as you've done, but that's not the same thing as saying there is no evidence.
Do you know all properties of all physical things?
Of course not. Only God.
So you can't claim that this is a different property that physical things don't have because you don't know them all.
I know enough about what physical things are and what thoughts are to make that claim, because those are the two things I'm most immediately aware of, my own thoughts and the physical things I interact with.
Okay, do we have any evidence of any immaterial things that you can conclude this is a similar property of immaterial things, or are you just asserting this unknown must be immaterial?
I don't follow what you're asking me there. Can you please can you restate or rephrase that?
Sure. So like if I want to establish that an unknown thing is either type A or type B, I look at the properties of both type A and type B, and I assume like, well, what's closer? I try to compare, is this unknown more like type A or more like type B? Now, if I don't know anything about type B is just a question mark, I know literally nothing about it, and I look at the properties of type A and I say, well, it's not any of the types of property A other than it exists. It has properties. So I know it has properties. I know this thing has properties. I know type A has properties. I know nothing about type B. It's always going to be more reasonable. It's probably going to be type A, because we know nothing about type A. You can't just say, well, type B is a question mark, and this isn't like type A, therefore type B.
Yeah, except when you translate that to material and immaterial, it's not the case that we don't know anything about the immaterial. You know it's not material for starters. That gives you a way of going off that. If it's not material, it's not going to have the properties that the material does. And again, I would again say, we're all very immediately aware of our own thoughts. We're very well versed in what immaterial things are, because you're aware of your own thoughts just as I am and just as every other person is. And you can sit and think about them and analyze them. That's not begging the question. I'm appealing to your phenomenological experience of being aware of your own thoughts.
But you're begging the question, assuming that's immaterial. The question we want to answer is, are those immaterial?
No, I'm not begging the question. I'm saying you sit and think about your own thoughts and consider them.
Yes.
And then from that, you extrapolate other things and you're aware of your own thoughts.
Which doesn't indicate they're immaterial. That's begging the question.
No, not starting there. You get there after you sit there and consider them and realize, oh, wait, my thoughts don't have a physical location. My thoughts don't have the same properties that material does. My thoughts are not the kind of thing that's divisible like matter is.
Okay, so let's go.
Or like there's the famous have you heard of the thought experiment Thomas Nagel came up with called What It Means to Be a Bat? Have you ever looked at that before?
Does there
or there's the fact that it seems like there's an aboutness to thoughts and things that are different than just merely having all the information. And there's the example of the scientist who has never experienced a strawberry and knows all the physical aspects of the strawberry because it's 500,000 years in the future where they know more about physical matter than I do. But then they walk out of the lab after knowing all that, and then they eat a strawberry. Now, if mind and matter are identical, thoughts are identical, it should be impossible for the scientist to actually experience anything new at that point. But I would argue they do, because there is something different about eating a strawberry than just knowing all the physical facts about one.
Okay, so let's go back to my analogy. We have two categories, A and B, and we have this X. X, we don't know what X is. We want to know, is it of A or B? Now, A, we see lots of properties. It has property 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and X has property 7. It's not on the list, but A has a bunch of things we can't see at the bottom. Like, we don't know all of the properties of A. We just know it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then question mark, question mark, question mark. And there's this thing X, it has property 7. We don't see it on the list, but maybe it could be somewhere down the list. We don't know yet. And then there's this property B with a big question mark on it. That's it. It's got a question mark. Where is it more reasonable to say X is? Is it more reasonable to say it's A, where there's a list and then just question marks? So we know something about it. We know it exists, and there's some more stuff we don't know. Or is it more reasonable to say there's this question mark thing, which may not exist at all? It may have no properties. It may not exist. Just a big question mark. Where should we put X?
I'm rejecting the analogy you're drawing because it's not like that at all. It's not the case that we don't know anything about immaterial things.
Well, forget the part of its analogy. Just take the question at face value. Like, would it be more reasonable to place X under the category A, where we know some about it, but not everything? Or would it be more reasonable to place X under the category B, where we know nothing about it?
I reject that. We don't know nothing about the immaterial.
Forget the analogy. Just answer it as a base question if it was on its own. Would it be more reasonable to place X in A or X in B?
See, I can't answer the question as you're asking it because I reject the premise by which you're answering the question. It'd be like me answering the fallacy of the complex question at this point.
No, because I'm saying, again, forget the analogy. This is just trying to get you to think about the perspective, the naturalist perspective. So from the naturalist perspective, it's more reasonable to place it in the A category, right? That seems like it's perfectly logical. The logical structure of this argument holds if it is the case that we have a category A and a category B, and we have some unknown, and if it's the case we know something about category A but know nothing about category B, then logically it follows it's more reasonable to place X in category A than B. And anytime this structure holds, that will always be a valid argument. Would that be the case? Or would you reject the validity of the argument?
It depends on the context. In order to place anything in a category, you need to know something about it. So if it's a complete unknown, then you basically have to throw up your hands and say, bah. If it's the case that you know things about it that make it not fit in category A, then maybe again you throw up your hands and say, bah, I don't know. So it really depends on what you're actually talking about, what you're filling in those in those signifiers there, excuse me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I would agree with everything you said there. I'd say like if A has property 1, 2, 3, 4, and X has property 7, so it's not on the properties, and then property B is just a question mark, then yeah, you totally reasonable to say, I don't know. That's perfectly reasonable. But it would never be reasonable to say it's B. That would not be reasonable.
If it has properties that line up with B, then it would be. And
well, B is a question mark.
That's what I'm claiming.
Well, I understand.
If B is a total question mark and you know nothing about it, then of course you can't say anything about it.
Right.
But I'm going to tell you that's not the case with immaterial things. That's one of the things I'm claiming. And again, you can reject that if you want, but that's not the same thing exactly.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So that's the fundamental difference between our position. I think we know nothing about the immaterial. It's just a question mark, a hypothetical ontology that has no evidence. You're saying we do know things about it. And I say, no, all of those could just fit into the unknown material stuff that we don't know yet. So what is your evidence that we do know stuff about the immaterial?
Because we can all sit and be aware of our minds and our thoughts and think about them and analyze them and pull them apart. Where you can sit in a chair and think, well, I'm having a thought about this. What does it mean to have that thought? What is it like to have that thought? You can think about thinking. You can consider your thoughts. That was one of the great insights the phenomenologists and who were continental philosophers in Europe had a while ago, is we can sit and think about our thoughts, and you can even think about thinking about your thoughts, and eventually it gets too abstracted to be very useful. But you can do all that, and you can then analyze them, and then that's when you realize that, oh, our thoughts and the phenomenology we experience, phenomena we experience, has things that are different, that are in fact the opposite of what physical things have.
Okay, so going back to my analogy, we have A is physical, B is immaterial, and X is thoughts, all experience, all thinking about thinking. And we want to know which one of these is. Is it material or immaterial? And you're saying thoughts have a property which is not on the currently known list.
I wouldn't say they have a property. They've got many, many properties, not just aboutness, but many, many properties.
You can add as many as you want on there. So it's like physical has properties 1, 2, 3, 4, and X has properties 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Makes no difference to the analogy. And so the question here is that why do you think these new properties that we just discovered in X are of this category B we have no evidence of? Because you haven't told me anything about the immaterial. All you said is, here are these properties and thoughts that we haven't discovered in physical. So like you're saying, thoughts have these properties. These properties don't exist in the physical that we know of. Therefore, new ontology.
No, it's not a new ontology, as I said before. This has been the default way that philosophy was done for a long, long period of time. It's been the default way that probably 95% of human beings have thought about things, recognizing the distinction between the immaterial and the material.
Yeah, most people used to be flat earthers. That's irrelevant. So new
no,
means evidence.
It's not irrelevant. It's just not particularly strong evidence. When 95% of human beings share the same experience, that's evidence in favor of that experience. Now, it's not the be all end all, because 95% of us can be wrong, but it's evidence in favor of that.
Yeah, so it's evidence the world is flat 2,000 years ago. Okay, but
people did not think the world was flat 2,000 years ago. The educated people have known since the ancient Greeks that the world was round.
Remember, you said majority. You said majority, so it would be based on your standard. But that's, again, I don't care. That's not evidence in my epistemology. This is junk. But I'm more interested here is that you claim that there's these properties we've discovered in X. Okay.
Wait, back up. So if I were to claim to you that you're a figment of my imagination and like solipsism or something crazy like that, you think the fact that 95% of people would say that's crazy is not evidence against that?
I wouldn't use that ever in any argument. Like I would make an argument for fallibilism and epistemology and testable predictions. I wouldn't say, oh, but most people believe I'm real. Like, that's kind of silly. If a solipsist doesn't believe you exist, maybe if they believed everybody else exists, maybe that might count. But that would be a terrible argument. So, but again, I'm trying to understand the structure of your argument here. So the structure of your argument is, we have this thing, thoughts. We're thinking about thinking, and this thinking about thinking has properties X, Y, and Z. Now, my question is, well, is thinking about thinking a material thing or an immaterial thing? Now you're saying the X, Y, and Z are not on the material list that we know of. You agree we don't know everything, so there's stuff on the bottom.
Yes, but I would even make it stronger than that, that what we know about the material thing says not only are they not there, but they can't be there.
Why can't they be there?
Because it's the opposite of it's the opposite of material things. Rocks are never about things.
You mean by definition?
Not just by definition, but by practical experience. Better than aboutness is the example of physical location and taking up size and space. Material things always have extension in the sense that they exist at a location and they're divisible, etc., etc., etc. Our thoughts are never like that. And so if our thoughts don't have size and location, then that's something that you can't get with material things, because the material necessarily has size and location. Even when you go down to the subatomic and like at quantum physics, there's still something there.
Okay, so your argument seems a lot like, time and space can't bend because we don't experience it, and because definitionally time is a philosophical thing, so it can't bend.
I never said that. No.
It's an analogy. So this is the argument used against Einstein's bending space-time. Time, by definition, is a philosophical concept, so it can't bend. It's not physical, and we never experienced time bending. Therefore, time can't bend. It's literally impossible, and they were proven wrong.
See, what you seem to be doing there is saying there's always this other possibility that maybe in 1,000 years we find something else.
Yep.
And what I'm positing is that's unfalsifiable because you'll always be able to say that about anything. So what I think is more rational is to make the reasonable inference, not deductive, but inductive, to say, well, it's every piece of matter we've ever found has size and location. Our thoughts don't have size and location, so it's reasonable to conclude our thoughts are not made of material.
Your picture froze. Are you still there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay, we're good. You're good now. Yes. So I would say the same thing would apply to prior to literally every single scientific discovery. You could use the same argument to reject the science.
How so? Because well, when you're dealing with inductive or inference, it's always probabilistic and not certainly, of course. But I don't see how that would not be the case, because you can always overturn that with enough evidence. In fact, that's usually how scientific revolutions work, is people hold on to their poor theories and keep modifying them until there's so much evidence they can't fight it anymore.
So it's like if I said, all of our past experiences is that sparks are created by guys with hammers. We see a giant spark in the sky called a lightning bolt. Therefore, it must be created by a guy named Thor. All of our past experience shows that the only way that these sparks are created is by humans. Therefore, it was created by Thor. And
well, you added a bunch of stuff to that, though, see? Because you posited Thor and all these other things.
Yes.
When in reality, all that would do is enable you to say, there's a spark in the sky. It's probably created by a human being or someone like him. You wouldn't be able to then infer all that other things without additional evidence.
Right. So that seems to me like the same thing you're doing. You're positing this entirely new ontology, the immaterial.
It's not new. It's been the default way of doing philosophy and the way most humans have thought for a long time.
Okay. So default means imagined. So they imagined this. That means there's no evidence in reality. It's
no,
just their
default
imagination.
Doesn't mean imagined. It's just the normal way of doing things. And if
they imagined.
No, default does not mean imagined. It's just a normal way of doing things. I have a default way I go about my day every day. It doesn't mean I'm imagining it. Now, strictly speaking, there shouldn't ever be a default view in the sense that one we don't defend, but that's not what that means.
So new means has been shown to not be imaginary. If it has not been shown to not be imaginary, then it's imaginary, it's not new. That's how I'm using the definition here. So if new would mean you've demonstrated it's not imaginary. Until that happens, it would be a new thing. So it's not new. So it's new because it's never been demonstrated to not be imaginary. So it's just imaginary. The only evidence material, it's imaginary, nothing else. So when I say new, I mean, you haven't demonstrated it's not imaginary yet.
I haven't demonstrated that to you, but again, I've got all these properties that thoughts have that the material not only does not have, but from our experience of science and looking at the world, we know the material cannot have those things, or at least 99.9% probability it cannot have those things. So it's then reasonable to say thoughts are immaterial.
Right. So that's the argument I'm saying is obviously fallacious. So you'd have to show that argument isn't fallacious before you can claim that. So that's the
How
topic.
is that fallacious? I'm looking at the evidence and inferring something from that.
We've never seen lightning before. Oh, lightning, therefore it can't be physical. That's the same argument.
No, it's not the same argument at all.
How is it different?
Because again, I have evidence that I'm pointing to, and I'm inferring something from that. The fact that you reject that evidence doesn't make it irrational.
Okay. So let's go through this again. So we've never seen any properties of lightning ever anywhere in the world. So imagine we're just some pygmy tribe, never seen lightning before. And so we see lightning for the first time. Now, nothing we've ever seen ever in anything in the physical world shares the properties of lightning as we have seen it. Based on your argument, if we use the same structure, it's reasonable to conclude lightning is immaterial.
Sure. Although that seems unlikely since you actually saw it with your eyes, and you don't see immaterial things with your eyes. So
right, it's not a perfect analogy. Analogies are never perfect. But you understand the structure of the argument here is that if you see something, conceptualize it. So I would say that the same thing that would apply to sight would apply to conceptualization. Anything you conceptualize is physical also. But if you see something and it shares no properties of things you've seen in the past, therefore it's a completely new thing, that is unreasonable. For the same reason it would be unreasonable to say lightning is a completely new thing. It's more reasonable to say, no, it's probably going to be like if you imagine two people here, we both see lightning. One person says it's a completely new thing because it shares none of the properties of the known stuff. And I'm like, well, it exists, and all of the existing stuff is physical, so it shares that property, which means it's probably going to be of the physical stuff. That's a more reasonable argument, isn't it?
No, because you just said you don't know anything about it, so you don't even know if it shares properties with the other thing. Excuse me, you don't even know if it shares properties with the physical if you don't know anything about it.
Well, if
You'd have to basically throw up your hands and be agnostic and say, I don't know. Maybe we should go find out some more about this.
Right. So if we didn't know anything about the variable, but we do, we know it exists. That's because we see it. That's the point. So we do know something about the variable. We don't know something about the immaterial. So we know something about what we're seeing. We can see the lightning. So we know something about that. We can see experience. We know something about experience. It exists. So we do know something about the variable. What we don't know anything about is the immaterial. So we do know something about the experience and the lightning in this analogy, and we're saying it exists. And we know the physical exists. They share that property. We don't know if the immaterial exists. That's not a property we know it has. It's just a question mark. So it seems more reasonable to say it's of the physical because it shares the property. It exists.
So are you claiming you can't know properties of things that don't exist?
Can't know, no.
If there's something that may or may not exist, are you saying we don't know what properties it has? Like you don't know properties of a fictitious gold mountain that does not exist because there's no mountain anywhere made entirely out of gold.
Well, I mean, you can assert properties of it, I guess.
Well, that's what I'm not sure if I quite followed you. I might have misunderstood, but you seem to be saying that even if something doesn't exist, then we don't know what properties it would or would not have.
Oh, no. So I'm saying if there's something we don't know anything about it, that would mean we don't know if it exists or doesn't exist. So existence may be a property on that thing and it may not be a property on that thing. So we do not know if B has the property of exists or does not have the property of exists. We do know A has the property of exists, and we do know X has the property of exists.
Okay. Again, I'm not quite following. I'm not sure I'm following you. You did say something like we don't know what properties the immaterial has, and again, that's something I would reject because as human beings, we're all immediately aware of our own thoughts when we talk to each other, and that gives us evidence as to what that is. And every other human being I've ever talked to has had thoughts, and when I ask them, well, what are the properties of your thoughts? They tell me kind of the same thing, which means it's just not me.
But that's not the immaterial, that's the X. That's the unknown variable we're trying to explain. Like that.
And then it has properties that are not material.
Right. So we see there are material properties, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. X, we don't know what it is, has properties 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We don't see these on the material properties, but they do share one property. They exist. We know they share that property. Exists as a property they share. Then there's this new category we know nothing about. We don't know if it exists. We don't know if it doesn't exist. We don't know any of the properties it has or doesn't have. Isn't it more reasonable to say because these two share the property of existence, then and there's lots of unknown stuff at the bottom that we don't know yet. They probably are the same category.
No, that's very, very weak. That's extremely weak.
I
If all they
grant
share is existence, you're going to say that means they're alike?
Yes, that's stronger than a question mark, which we don't know if they even share that. Yes. I mean, that would be true, right? It'd be a small amount of evidence that if they shared this one property, these two things share property 1 of existence, and we don't know if B and X share this property, well, then that would be more stronger evidence, a very tiny amount, that physical mind are better, right?
No, because I reject your classification that we don't know anything about the immaterial and that we don't have evidence for it. You've rejected the evidence that I've given you, and hey, that's your intellectual right to do, but that's why I don't reject the analogy you're making, because it doesn't fit with what I'm trying to say at all.
Well, I still haven't, because you keep giving properties of X, like here's our experience, it has these properties, but that doesn't tell us any properties of immaterial. You just keep listing more properties of X. So we have A, physical, B, immaterial, here's the unknown variable X, and we want to know which one this is. You just keep listing more X's, like here's another X, here's another X. I want to know, why should we think this is this immaterial category? What is our evidence of the immaterial, not just more X's? I grant the X's. I grant there's stuff we don't know.
We should think it's immaterial because we have good observational evidence of what the immaterial is. We all have that, not just from science, but in virtue of being human beings and being around and alive in the world. And we know these properties are not things that are found in the material, in matter. And on top of that, they're things that it seems cannot be found in material and matter because it's the opposite.
Again, I don't understand what you mean when you said that a few times. I still don't understand what you mean by that, because it's like, to me, there's this, we know the physical exists. I assume we both agree on that one. And we know mental experience exists. Those things both exist. So they share the property of existence. And you keep saying there are these properties in the thoughts that are not found in the properties of the physical. Granted, 100% agree with you. Then you make this leap that I'm not following here of, well, we know some properties about B, about immaterial, and we can say that these things found in our experience are like B. But I haven't seen any evidence of this B stuff. Like, where did we ever get evidence of the B stuff? You just, because the only evidence you keep listing is in thoughts, they have these properties that are not in the physical. And that's all you keep saying. So there's this unknown X.
Okay, fine. Scrap the word immaterial, excuse me then.
Okay.
Our thoughts and mental experiences have properties that are not found in the material. You can list them all together. So things like indivisible, lacking spatial location, aboutness, and at least 4 or 5 other ones that I could run through. And then group all those things together, and what you have is something that is the opposite of the material. So if you want to label it something like hypothesis X and then group all those things together, okay, that's fine. But then I'm going to say, but that's not material stuff then, what you're positing.
Right. So that's great. We can go from there. So if we have the set of things that we don't see in the material, now obviously we both know that there's more stuff in the material we haven't discovered yet. So there's a hole there that maybe these things could fit in that hole. So why was it reasonable to conclude it's never in that hole? There's nowhere in that hole, no matter how far down we go. And then you're saying, well, it's inductive. It's an inductive case. We don't see it up here, so we're probably not going to see it down there. Right?
More or less, yeah. I would say it's actually stronger than that, because it's not the case of like a cop stumbles across a murder that he's never seen, that where the evidence indicates something like really, really weird, like somebody drove from 5 states away, killed somebody, and then made it back undetected. Well, that he would probably say that's a very unlikely conclusion, because those things typically don't happen, or if they do, they're very, very rare. But there's some groundwork you can lay where that's at least plausible. It's not impossible. Where I would say, when you're looking at the aspects that, the properties thoughts have, if it's not impossible, it's about as close to it as you can get to say they're going to arise from the material, because it's contrary to what we know of material.
Okay, so I would say that if we look, there's lots of spooky stuff in the material, like spooky action at a distance, entanglement, violations or apparent violations of logic and quantum mechanics. We see space-time literally bend. Time is literally bending and doing weird stuff. So we see lots of new things in the physical that do lots of weird stuff that we thought was impossible in the physical. And it seems like this wouldn't be any different. This is probably less weird than time
Has
bending.
any of those things produced an immaterial thing?
Any of
the spooky stuff you're talking about?
So like emergent space-time, amplituhedron, information itself existing in physical space.
Emergent space-time assumes that matter is giving rise to the immaterial, though.
Matter is immaterial. So in emergent space-time, space and time emerge from other physical things that are outside of space and time.
Okay. So you're talking about theories about the beginning of the universe then? I guess I'm not familiar with that one.
It's quantum mechanics.
Well, I haven't studied quantum mechanics in much depth, so I'm not really able to speak to that.
That's fair, but it seems like the physical can actually go into that territory, and the things that are explained in physics right now are even more weird. So if something even more weird is explained as physical, then it seems not like a stretch to say these unknown things are probably physical too.
No, I don't think so, because again, they're like so completely opposite, not just definitionally, but in practical reality. And I go back to it because it's just such an easy example to see. Matter has physical location. Matter can be divided. Your thoughts can't be.
Well, so like emergent space-time is outside of space and time, so it doesn't have a location either. So does quantum fields and virtual particles. So those also would fall into answer those exact same questions you just did, as here are physical things that do exactly the thing you say they don't do.
Well, it sounds to me like they're positing the immaterial to explain the material then.
Um,
And again, I'm not terribly familiar with these theories in quantum mechanics, so I could be getting that wrong.
well, I mean, I don't know how that would work, because if you're saying immaterial is things that don't have these properties, and there are these things that literally physical stuff is intrinsically made of these properties, that would seem to contradict your argument. But you said you only have an hour. I want to respect your time. It's almost 4:30.
Yeah, I've only got 2 or 3 minutes left, so I didn't expect we were going to talk about arguments for the immaterial of the mind for an hour. So,
Yeah, it was a good conversation.
Maybe better to say arguments against in your case.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so thanks again for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation. It was really enjoyable. I'd definitely love to chat with you again sometime, and about some of the other arguments too as well. If you'd like to give another link, shout out to your website so people can find you, and thanks.
Okay. Here, let me try and pull it up so I can tell you exactly. It's wcatradio.com/theexaminedlife/. It's one of the professors at the school where I got my master's runs a whole media group, and he asked me to start a podcast on there about 2 or 3 years ago. And I'm up to about 94, 95 episodes. I've done all kinds of stuff on various ways you should think about philosophy. I every now and again, when a new controversy comes up that seems like it'll work, I do an episode where I say, here's how we could use inference to the best explanation, apply it to this, and conclude what's most likely to happen. One of the first ones I did, I said, here's why conspiracy theories are almost always wrong, because they virtually always fail inference to the best explanation things. Yeah, so I've done lots of different stuff on there. Hopefully I'll get back to updating it again more regularly in the future as I get more time as my kids are back in school. So
awesome. Thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it, and I'll talk to you later.
Well, thanks for having a civil discussion with me. I appreciate that. Even though we don't see eye to eye at all, there was no name calling or shouting. So
absolutely, Mr. Beardman. I call you Beardman.
Oh yeah. Well, you probably don't notice, but I've got a little bit of what my wife calls a mask beard going on, because there's allergy season, so I wear a mask when I go outside, and it presses in right there and makes it look really weird.
Awesome. Well, I'll let you go make dinner. Have fun with your family. Tell your son happy birthday. Daughter.
I'll do that. Yes. Yeah. Son. It was my son. Yeah. No worries.
Right the first time.
Well, you have a good evening yourself, Tom.
You too. Talk to you later.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.